One of the most frustrating things in fantasy football is when you have a player who's early in their career and they're showing a lot of signs that they're going to go off, that they're going to be one of the next big things, a huge producer in fantasy. Then that next season comes around and they fall off the map. There's nowhere to be found. They're MIA. And it's frustrating because a lot of fantasy analysts pump this guy up. He's got the metrics. He's got the physical tools. He's got something in his profile indicating that he could be a huge riser, that things are going to happen. He's going to be our next big thing in fantasy football. Everybody's going to need him. He's going to be a top-tier dynasty asset for the next 10 years. Then all of a sudden, whoosh, gone. The tablecloth is pulled out from under us. The china falls all over the place. Glass is broken and everything. This year's player like this, one of them is Elijah Moore. The easy thing to point to right now, and what everyone's going to say, is the quarterback play. And yes, that is true. It is the quarterback play, a big part of the issue, but there could be some underlying things that we could have looked at prior to the season to really at least speculate as what could have happened. There were a lot of people going into the season this year, anointing him already, and really classifying as a player that was just destined to go off. Really, when you look through the tea leaves, more of a speculative asset. And you need to see this video through to really know why. Yesterday, he saw just 10 snaps, being out-snapped by Denzel Mims, Braxton Berrios, Jeff Smith. And this is just another cog in the machine here. It's been a lonely season here for Elijah Moore. On the season, he has caught just 16 balls for 203 yards, no touchdowns. He saw 21 targets in his first 3 games, and then it faded away. 186 air yards in week 3, and averaged 91 air yards per game in his first 5 games, so he was a part of the offense, and then it just all dipped. He was a recommendation in one of my trade videos earlier this season. When we look at the workload of these players versus their production, he was getting a sizable amount of air yards versus targets, and his production wasn't matching it, and that was an indicator that he could be a buy low for future production later if things started to hit. That was also an indicator that he was getting this production and he wasn't doing anything with it. This is when Zach Wilson was also out of the fold, different quarterback play, things were different. Last season, he had 3 wide receiver 1 weeks and 5 double-digit PPR performances, and those 2 performances that weren't fantasy relevant, they're wide receiver 3 or worse. But 3 wide receiver 1 weeks is very exciting for a rookie. It's something that really gets you excited, like you could get a year 2 blow up. On the other side of the spectrum, it's just 3 blow off top weeks with a lot of down weeks, and you really don't know what you're going to get to the next season. College profile is very interesting too. Once you really zoom out and look at it and zoom back into it, he broke out at age 19 with a 36.15% market share of Ole Miss's passing production. That was in 2020, but it was only like 890 yards, so it wasn't like he went gangbusters. He was just a big proponent of an offense that wasn't very explosive at that time. The following season in 2021, he broke 1,000 yards, but still wasn't gangbusters, didn't get double-digit touchdowns, nothing like that. Over the course of his career at Ole Miss, he played 92% of his snaps in the slots. That's an indicator that he's a slot receiver. Not much experience on the outside at least. And then you go to his athletic profile, 5'9", 178 pounds, 4.4 40-yard dash, actually 4.35, but you got to adjust that since it was a pro day time, adding the extra to that to make it on point with the combine times. So a 36th percentile size adjusted speed score, even if it was at 4.35, it's still probably pushing around 50th percentile. Not really solid when you're 178 pounds, 5'9". So the size is an interesting factor. Should have been a big red flag going into the season. Haven't heard many people talk about that. I was interested in him, but he was going for so much that I couldn't get him. He was going over guys like Josh Jacobs and stuff like that. In redraft, he was a trendy mid-round prospect. There's a major red flag here. 92% of his snaps in the slot. Size is the intriguing part of his profile. Also, his speed along with it, size-adjusted speed, really means he needs to be a route-running wizard to be able to be super successful on the outside. And that is something that is not really in the cards for a lot of wide receivers. He's a good route runner. I looked back at my draft notes from when he was coming out. I noted that he was a very good route runner, very good at creating separation, but not a savant. Really, when you have some deficits athletically, physically, sometimes you need to be a savant in other areas to really make up for that. He was drafted in the second round, high-end draft capital. So when you look at the college production, good enough, more than good enough. This indicates that it's highly likely that he won't bust, and he's a good candidate to give you some production over the course of his career. We might have just had that during his rookie season. But also, we have red flags with his physical profile here, his athletic profile. So we do have things that are counteracting each other. Also, during his NFL career so far, with the Jets, he's lined up in the slot 26.9% of the time, so he's not really been placed in an advantageous position for him to grow. He can play on the outside a little bit, but that should not be his main thing. Just looking at the profile here, if he was a route running savant, a wizard with that, kind of like a Keenan Allen or something, he could probably get away with that. But considering his deficits in that part of his profile, he is more like a slot plus, a slot guy that can get downfield a little bit, a slot guy you can put on the outside some, a slot guy that can do a little bit more for you. He's actually a high-end slot receiver. That's really what we're looking at here. When you look at his profile as a whole, he doesn't stand out as being a tremendously great prospect. He's not going to be the next Jamar Chase, and not going to be the next Calvin Johnson, not going to be any of those top-tier wide receivers. When you look at everything as a whole, he is a candidate to get you production. He's a candidate to be a fantasy relevant wide receiver. He's a guy that will probably live in the wide receiver bubble as long as the situation dictates where he's good at. If he's being placed in a situation that does not allow him to thrive, then he may be just a big potential bust. So the thing here is the trade deadline is very soon. It's coming at us fast. Will he get moved on the market? Is he going to continue to work on this Jets team? What's going to happen to him? We're going to know very soon. But the fact that this quarterback situation is not working out for him, he's not being used appropriately, not getting workload, not getting targets, not being used, is an overall downer in fantasy. There were red flags going into this. We knew Zach Wilson was his quarterback. We didn't know 100% how the developmental process for Zach Wilson going from year 1 to year 2 was going to be. We also didn't account for him being just a slot plus. That's what I call these types of wide receivers, slot plus. They're a slot wide receiver that can do a little bit more, and how he was going to be used in that perspective. Also, Garrett Wilson was drafted in the first round. Not just in the first round, but with high draft capital in the first round. Indicates that they like him a lot. Also indicates that he's a very good wide receiver prospect. When you go back to this channel, you look at me talk about him, I talk up his game a lot. I've been watching him over the course of his collegiate career and even now, and he is a very solid prospect. When you look at him compared to Elijah Moore, there's levels to this game. And Garrett Wilson is on an entirely different level than Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore is not on Garrett Wilson's level when it comes to balling out on the field. No way, shape, or form. When it comes to nuance, ball skills, and all that stuff, Elijah Moore is a type of wide receiver who can be productive, but is not the type of wide receiver who can just straight up take over. What we need out of Elijah Moore is him to get traded into an advantageous situation. The thing about this is going to boost up his stock in fantasy football, especially in Dynasty, because we're going to latch onto that profile, especially that collegiate profile, with the breakout age and everything else. But we have to understand that there are some limitations, there are some risk factors here. Even if he goes to Chiefs, Tampa Bay, Minnesota, you just insert team here, no matter where he goes. instead of looking at him as a guaranteed thing, looking at him as a good player inserted here, look at him as a speculative asset going forward, because that's what he has been this whole time, is a speculative asset. He has not been a guaranteed thing. He's a guy you put chips on, and you're hoping that goes boom, because he's got some things in his profile that could lend him to be very productive if things align right with him. It has not been. Quarterback play, offensive system, coaching regime, whatever's in the fold here, it's not working out. Could that change? Maybe, but we don't know. But we're just going to have to see. But right now, Elijah Moore has been a bust this year. The main thing fantasy football has been ignoring was the red flags going into the season. A lot of people were not pointing that out. I liked him. I'm going to admit, I did like him. I just wasn't able to get him because so many people were paying up for him this year. So many people were trying to get him that I was not able to obtain him in many drafts. He was priced out of the market for me. Sometimes in maybe dynasty mock drafts, I was able to get him. But honestly, the price went so insane over this offseason, especially right before draft time. He had some good numbers, also a good reception perception grade and all that stuff, that it got very cloudy when it came to looking at his red flags going into the year. When you're talking about playing with Zach Wilson, talking about Garrett Wilson being into the fold, Breece Hall being added in, Breece Hall sucking up targets, and everything else, all these changes that he kind of got overlooked. He was being drafted in the middle of rounds of redraft. The funny thing is, in shark drafts, his price was at the highest because a lot of people were just trying to be sexy with him. He was a major risk this whole time, and that got overlooked. Let me know what you think about Elijah Moore in the comments below. Where do you want him traded? What do you think about him going forward? Do you agree or disagree from this assessment? I really just think he's more of a speculative asset than a sure thing. That's really what sums it up. But let me know in the comments below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on the way out. It's really going to help you out going forward with setting lineups, waiver wire pickups, and everything else. I like to do a video on every single waiver wire option every week. That way you got your a la carte version of your waiver wire show instead of having to sit through 20 players being talked to. But I want to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.